Welcome everyone to today's webinar, How Hospitals and Health Systems Can Manage Skill Shortages and Other Challenges in 2020 and Beyond. I'm Anuja Vaidya with Beckles Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. We're looking forward to hearing your questions. We will also have a series of audience polling questions during today's webinar. When we reach each poll slide, the poll question will pop up automatically on your screen. Our speakers will give a few seconds for you to select an answer from the option on your screen and click Submit. Thank you in advance for your participation. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenter. Tom Tonkin is a performance-driven, high-energy, and customer-focused executive with more than 25 years of leadership experience, spanning organizational and leadership development, coupled with hands-on technical success. He is currently serving as Senior Principal Consultant, Change Management and Transformation, Thought Leadership and Advisory Services for Cornerstone On Demand. He excels at devising and implementing strategic learning and development programs for customers to maximize their return on enablement investment. He spent a major part of his career working at Oracle Corporation for 19 years. Dr. Tonkin also served in various leadership roles at Oracle, both in sales and consulting, across mid-size and enterprise customers in North America and global capacities. His industry background includes healthcare, insurance, and telecommunications with a focus on software and system integration. At this time, I'm pleased to turn the floor over to Tom to begin today's presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Anuja, and thank you, McKenna. I want to really start this entire presentation with sort of a list of thank yous because these things don't appear by themselves. So again, Beckers, thank you so much for having us. I want to especially thank my entire team at Cornerstone, Dave Gideon, Christine Corning, Michael Dale, Lynn Craven, Ed Turry, all of these folks that made this happen, but especially my partner in crime, Catherine West. Thank you again for supporting me in this rather critical stage, not only in healthcare, but in society as a whole. But I do want to thank those in the front lines. It would be foolish for me to be remiss and not really understand and pay attention to really what's happening in the world today that's really transforming the way we do things in every shape. And so I want to thank those first responders, our healthcare providers, also those that are listening today and you're supporting those folks. You're also very much important. I think the unsung heroes in all of this, and I am hopeful that in the next, say, 35 to 40 minutes, we can bring some interesting topics and ideas to bear to not only support us today, but in the future. Given that perspective, I really feel like we need to address the latest challenge that we have, which is the COVID-19 virus and all that is going on in this pandemic. And it's really changing the way we operate. And as I was thinking about putting this presentation together, mind you, when we do these kinds of presentations, these get scheduled way in advance, and we put together what we believe we'll be talking about at that time. And it would be foolish for me to pretend that we had this particular situation in mind. And nevertheless, here it is. And so we've been able to take the topic and really address what we wanted to talk about, but really in the confines of this current pandemic. Somewhat of a plug for what we're trying to do here at Cornerstone is we feel that we're all in this together, and we put together a website called cornerstonecares.com, and in there you'll find all sorts of free training, everything from COVID-19 and what you need to know to stress management, to working from home, to all sorts of interesting resources, and that gets updated almost on a daily basis as we learn ourselves. So we try to feel a little bit about what it is that we're trying to do and help you out. So for example, you might find something like this when you log in, and it might be helpful and it might be able to make your day just a little bit better. And if we can do that, we're all in it together. So I appreciate your attention on that. So given what we have in front of us, let's get back to our regularly scheduled program. And again, I say sort of because of the confines of what we're currently working on. In essence, the agenda really was focused around the lessons of healthcare organizations can learn from other industries to deliver on their mission. But I will be very frank with everyone here to say it is going to be a COVID-19 edition. And I'm hoping that by the time we're done speaking, you can hang up the phone and turn off the webinar and be able to go do something to help the situation. We'll talk a little bit about formulating an adjunct workforce, this idea of moving from what we're usually talk about, like just-in-case learning, to just-in-time learning. Often our learning paradigms are things that we believe we might need, but in this time of urgency, we really want to move towards a just-in-time or almost in a flow of work kind of learning. And then I want to talk a little bit about the paradigms that we currently have between strategy, operations, and now what we're finding around crisis readiness and whether or not we're prepared to do the things we need to do. So before I jump into it, given where you are today, I know that things change so much. I wanted to just get a pulse, get a sentiment about your continuity, your business continuity plans of today. Things are just a big challenge. It seems like every day something new is happening, and so I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about it. Just not try to make it too difficult here, but wanted to get a pulse on how you feel about whatever business you're running, your department, your organizations, your institutions, whatever that might be, maybe even your family, and how you're doing things at home. I'd like to understand where you are. I'll give you a few seconds. Well, that's good to hear. Here's the poll results. It seems like a better part of you are moderately confident, which is good. Things have changed. I think we're all starting to learn this new normal that might become, or the term that people are using now is this next normal. So let's get into it. And with that in mind, I want to talk about today's guiding theme. And this is something that I have talked about for quite some time, but I think it's very appropriate for us to bring up today, which is this idea that disruption magnifies the crack of our operational foundation. And I think that's so true from everything to large organizations and departments and institutions to arguably ourselves. We know that when we're under stress and we're under disruption of some kind, our faults, our challenges, whether it be individually or organizationally, seem to magnify themselves. And I think that in some kind of odd way, we should really take advantage of this time to see what those stress fractures are in our foundation and see if we can address them. When things are going very well, when people are happy, you don't necessarily notice the faults, the challenges. We seem to gloss over them. However, when it's the opposite, those come out. And it's an opportunity for us to diagnose not only ourselves, but our organizations as a whole. So we don't want to take yesterday's problems, move them forward, and continue with them. And so let's go back, not maybe 3 to 4 months ago. You might have seen a slide like me, like this coming up, this what I call this pre-COVID slide, where we had all of these skilled jobs that we need to fill, and we had these unskilled jobs that we had to fill. And here we find ourselves having not very many skilled workers and having a whole bunch of unskilled workers. And the skills divide becomes a very, very real. What I find very arguably inspiring of this slide is this actually has continued in this new pandemic type of thing that we're currently having to deal with. Matter of fact, in pre-COVID, we would have seen this idea that we have these 6.5 million Americans looking for work, and they currently don't have the skills of these 7.6 unfulfilled jobs. Obviously, in a very short period of time, those numbers are no longer valid. We are in a completely different situation. However, I think the underlying issue continues to show itself, and I'd like to address each one of those as we go. Again, we talk about this disruptor as an external force that we have no control over, and this particular pandemic fits brilliantly into this. Let's start with this idea of the adjunct workforce. How quickly can I assemble not only to fill the jobs I need, but to fill the jobs I need quickly, specifically, and arguably from not drawing from another pool. So what we have found is, let's take a look at what industry is doing, and then let's jump in to see what healthcare can do. What we're finding interesting doing literally right now, if we have two companies that are coming together, we have Hyatt Hotels and Amazon. The situation is, and we're going to break this down, right? First, we have the situation where social distancing has basically kept people home, and the need for them to bring stuff home, has quickly overwhelmed the companies like Amazon. In turn, that same situation has people not traveling as much and not being as entertained through fine dining, hoteling. So you have a lot of people out of work. And the situation is, how can we then take these different types of skills maybe found in the entertainment hospitality industry and reskill them into this fulfillment? And that's exactly what's happening. Amazon and Hyatt have teamed up and have taken the employees that Hyatt has furloughed and have started to provide training so they can jump right in and maintain the fulfillment services that Amazon needs in this particular situation. Not only does this help both companies, meaning Hyatt has ability to put their company, their employees in an income generating situation, Amazon gets to fulfill, but better yet, when we get back to what's called the next normal, I can bring all of those employees back that were furloughed from Hyatt right back to their old jobs. I have much less onboarding requirements and associated costs to them. So this is happening throughout our industry. This is something that probably hasn't really occurred. Actually, I can't even remember when this has occurred, when we have these kinds of organizations teaming up. What's interesting is that same situation is happening in healthcare. We obviously have this pandemic putting a tremendous amount of strain on our systems. We need more triage help and equipment than we've ever had before. We have also seen that both federal and state governments are defining what is to be essential versus non-essential medical care, things like elective surgery. So we have this dichotomous issue where we need a lot more critical care nurses, but we don't necessarily need people that provide what the government suggests is non-essential. So we have this same kind of gap. So for example, can I restaff a dermatologist or a dermatology nurse to become a critical care nurse? And can I roll those out in such a way to be able to arguably service this extra strain in the healthcare industry that I probably won't carry over into the future, and be able to take advantage of those that potentially have certifications or the skill to become critical care nurses. Maybe not completely, but probably a much smaller gap than, say, having to bring somebody who's never been in the healthcare industry. And so we're seeing a lot of different organizations and institutions try to get to that place where we can start looking at displaced, non-essential, as defined by the government, medical practitioners, and bring them in sort of into that pandemic war that we're trying to fight. So the real takeaway to this thing here is the best way to do this is to understand all of your skill mix that you have, whether that be certifications, whether it be just skills that are learned on the hospital floor or any institution that may happen that may not necessarily be something that is sort of tracked. And by understanding that and understanding the gaps that you need, you'll be able to close them very quickly and be able to place the training or the experiential programs that you need to close that gap. This is very much in sync with what I started this presentation with that skills divide. It's the same premise, but it's now with a different lens. And so if those that have the skill gap problems in the future are having challenges in the present, you most likely will have them also, in the past, most have them in the future as well. And so here's an opportunity. Remember I told you it's a great opportunity to diagnose some of those cracks. Are you in a situation where you understand what your skills are by person, certifications, even experiences that they may have, be able to bring those to bear and then understand what it is you need at any given time. Here's another really great opportunity for you is, let's say you had that installed. We know that there's a bunch of people on hospital floors, institutions that are just gaining on-the-job experience drinking from a fire hose. That is it's unfortunate that's under these circumstances, but yet what a great opportunity to take advantage for this and in the future. Document those, bring those in, understand that every little thing that we can find in skills in this area is going to not help us in the future, but arguably, this might happen again and we'll be better prepared for that. So that gives you a perspective of what it means to create an adjunct workforce. So I'm going to pause here for a second, first of all, because I want to get something to drink. Second, we're going to have Q&A here at the end, and I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to reflect on this particular topic. If you have any questions, because just the way the cadence and the flow of this presentation goes, it's best if we sort of do it all at the end, but I don't want you to forget. So think about what it is that you might have a question about or even a comment. I know that a lot of you are experienced in this, and maybe you have something that you want to share with everybody. Please put it in the Q&A box, and we'll address it as we get towards the end. All right. Let's move on to the second area, this idea of what I'm calling just-in-case learning to just-in-time learning. Many times when we don't have that urgency, if we don't really understand what it is that we're going to do, but we have a training schedule. Maybe we have some time to sit down in the lunchroom at that computer or even that iPad to sit down and say, okay, well, I really was always curious about this particular skill of communication or presentation. Maybe I have a particular clinical skill that I want to dive into. We call that sort of just-in-case learning, so to kind of take it off. But arguably, it's now more than ever, this idea of just-in-time learning is taking over. We see this need. Let's say if you did build this adjunct workforce and you gave them all the training that you needed to become a critical care nurse for that period of time, but maybe there's something missing right then and there. How is it that you're going to be able to deliver that? And no one's got time to sit down and look at something. So let's take a look at what current things are happening in the private industry that maybe we can take advantage in healthcare. This is an interesting thing, a case study that's going on. Basically, Kroger. Kroger is kind of in that same situation as Amazon. They're having all sorts of people coming in. They're having to service a lot of people. It's just a different way of doing business. Now, I am certain that most people listening to this conversation right now have been in the grocery store and that probably have been in the grocery store ever since you can remember. There is a certain social set of norms and behaviors when you're a grocery store. There is probably not a grocery store in this country that you couldn't walk in. Say if you lived in New York and you flew to Arizona and you had to go to a grocery store, I'm pretty sure you can navigate yourself through this. There are aisles. You've got the produce when you first walk in. You've probably got the dairy all the way in the back. You've got the refrigerator stuff together. You've got the frozen stuff, right? You've got the paper and the empty places where the toilet paper would be. All are these social norms and how we would do it. We would get our buggy and we'd fill it up and we would go to the cashier and do it. There's nobody sitting in front of the grocery store saying, oh, welcome to our grocery store. Here's what you need to do. Grab a buggy, fill it with your stuff, and keep going. There are these social norms. However, these kind of disruptions have changed how we do things. For example, this idea of being 6 feet apart. It's now a social norm. It's something that if somebody isn't 6 feet apart from you, you feel uncomfortable maybe. You feel as if they are tone deaf to the situation. And so how do we start arguably teaching or having others learn these social norms? So Kroger, what have they done? They have putting these stickers or these signs on the floor saying this is where you should stand, and the next sign is arguably 6 feet apart. I've even seen internet memes where it talks about dog lovers, right? You should be at least 2 Great Pyrenees away from each other, or 18 Chihuahuas. It's a kind of a new unit that comes to play. You see the cashier who has to talk to the people. Now they have this barrier, basically this plexiglass between the consumer themselves. Not only is that protective, but that's a way to teach people the new social norms of how to conduct business. And so it's a very interesting time where we're starting to see very elementary but effective ways of how do we actually teach people. It's this idea of being very graphic rich. It also cuts across the language barriers that we may find ourselves in, where people don't necessarily have to know, but they now know how to behave in this new world. And obviously, you get the benefit of being safe, and you have organizations like Kroger and other organizations that feel as if they're not only serving the customer in a very real way by providing the provisions and food and all that, but also giving a sense of safety that goes with it. So I find this case very interesting. And by the way, the cases seem to continue and the innovation just seems to continue to grow. So the question now I have is, how can we, in this current situation, learn about just-in-time learning? Well, here's what's going on right now. We have a need for ventilators. Let's just take that as the example, but you could probably use all sorts of other examples. And we apparently have a shortage of ventilators, and the good news is we have many manufacturers jumping in trying to close that gap. To give you a perspective of the use of ventilators in a non-pandemic situation, it's usually about 2.7% of the time, so it's 2.7 instances out of 1,000 that ventilators are used. So it's not very common, arguably, that things get used. But yet you have new manufacturers jumping in saying, hey, I want to help. And that's great. And we're going to take all that on, the likes of Tesla and Dyson coming in saying they want to help. Now, here's the issue, right? We're looking at critical care nurses. We arguably are looking maybe for both functional and vocational. What I'm meaning is adjunct, that we talked about, maybe people that don't usually do this, or even vocational nurses that maybe have never dealt with this before, having to now operate a ventilator. Now, when you operate a ventilator, you don't do it just from a mechanical perspective. You also have to utilize certain drugs. There's intubation. You have to certainly monitor vital signs. There's a bunch of other stuff that goes with it. But let's just say you knew all of this. What's interesting is you have these ventilators being built, but they're all different. They're all coming from all sorts of different places. And I decided to give you a perspective of what it might look like on the floor. At the top, that's a Dyson ventilator. That was actually apparently designed in less than 10 days. And it's basically taking the same kind of premises that Dyson uses for a lot of their products. It's very analog, a lot of buttons and slides, and you have to push things along and all this. And that's how you operate that one. Tesla, on the other hand, and news reports report back that they decided to use a lot of the parts from their Model 3 car to build a ventilator. You can see, and that's the one at the bottom. Very different parts. It's not analog; it's all digital. They're using a almost like a tablet-looking front end to conduct this. So you have all of these different things coming at you. You need to do it very, very quickly. How do I learn how to use this at any given time? Because I don't know which one I'm going to get. And so you need to have a view. And so what we're looking at is things like podcasting. Right. So you're sitting there, you go to to a menu, and you sit there and go, okay, which ventilator do I have? Right. You click on that, and there's somebody in your ear saying, okay, this is a Tesla. What you need to do is plug this in, press this button. It's going to come up. It's going to walk you through this just in time as you need. Maybe even graphic-rich content that you can print out or paste on the wall, or maybe have it hang on the device itself. Right? This is how we're starting to get into trying to close that gap from what we were calling just-in-case learning to just-in-time learning. I am sure there's all sorts of different ways of doing this, but this idea of quickly getting not only just the information, but your ability to execute very, very quickly has become a challenge. I know that when doing this research and talking to a lot of different directors and CLOs and CHROs in the healthcare, podcasting and having mobile learning seems to be sort of have a new set of a new value, and it's not as simple as sort of taking your instructor-led training or live stuff and just putting it electronically. There has to be micro learning paradigms that seep in. I don't have time. I'm looking at 2 or 3 minutes at most to spend to find out how I actually do my job. And certainly having the benefits that come from this, right, is to be able to administer it with confidence and with greater levels of survival, right, reducing medical errors at that point. I'm just using ventilators as an example. I am sure there's a bunch of other things that are new because of these new stresses. I go back to the guiding theme of this conversation. What is the associated crack in your foundation that maybe doesn't give you the opportunity to do that just-in-time learning? Do you have antiquated or just-in-case learning kinds of fundamentals and piping and infrastructure? Do you need something that's just more just-in-time learning? Even if you just had the vehicle, just some kind of methodology that we all know, and we could just start dropping those little 80 bits piece of content into that flow so people can get that information quickly with some level of confidence. So, again, I pause for reflection, and I want you to think about any kinds of questions you have here. Put them in the chat. I'm sorry, in the Q&A. And maybe you have a comment. Maybe there's another example that you can share with us. Again, this is some of these examples I'm giving you very much current, but the underlying issues are things that I believe I have seen for quite some time, and I think again it's that disruptor magnifying the cracks in our foundation that allow us to take a look at it and give us an opportunity to fix them. So I will take another sip here of water as you reflect and think about what you want to type in there. Excellent. All right, let's go to part 3 of this. This is a very interesting opportunity that we have to reflect on how we actually can arguably retransform how we go about conducting ourselves in this area. I want to talk about strategic and operational management to crisis readiness. And so I've given you what the difference is through a set of assumptions. Mind you, that I tend, in a lot of my slides when I do my presentations, I tend to have a lot of text because I want, arguably you can get the slides, or maybe you're taking a picture of it right now, to take home and sort of peruse them at a slower pace. So what we have here is different situations require different playbooks. And the problem is if we have a situation that we don't have a playbook for, we tend to utilize the default playbook that we currently have. And so in essence, I'm actually pointing to the middle one here, this operational management. Operational management is how do we actually go about our business day to day? And it comes with what I call a fixed set of assumptions. And those assumptions are easy as, okay, all my systems work. And I have all the key personnel identified and they're all trained and they have access to resources. Now, mind you, if these aren't true, I should go fix these. But that's how we operate. This is very assumptive. And we might have a contingency plan of if that operation doesn't work, maybe we work at other situations. But we don't have those assumptions right now in the current societal issues in this pandemic are just not true. They're just not true. Let's go to the fluid set of assumptions, right? Which is this idea of crisis readiness, right? There may be physical danger, which should be your first priority. Sure enough, that's a good assumption right now. You and your staff may suffer from confusion, friction, pressure, and other stress. Bingo. Key staff may be unavailable. Again, going back to our discussion around adjunct workforces, right, and how we solve that problem. External support may be needed, emergency services or neighboring business, that isn't there. There may be a lack of clear information about what's happening. And one of my favorite ones, and this particular one, is news may travel fast, shaping public perception of the crisis and how it's being handled. Well, I at one point in the beginning of this whole thing, when you get so much news coming out and you're trying to formulate how it is that you're going to deal with it, I was calling it, instead of a pandemic, I was calling it an infodemic, right? It's just like we were feeling this extra undue stress, not necessarily because maybe they're reporting these terrible numbers, but, are these real numbers? What are they trying to tell us? It's this exaggeration or this lack of knowledge, and therefore introducing confusion and friction and pressure and stress that we're currently feeling. However, if you have these assumptions and you want to solve these assumptions, you have yourself a crisis readiness opportunity. And so there's an opportunity here. If there's a crack in your foundation around crisis readiness, maybe there's an opportunity for you to reevaluate where you are in your crisis readiness and be able to start putting plans together and see what the things like, what is the thing that I need to do? Maybe next time it's not necessarily ventilators. Maybe it's, dialysis machines. Who knows, right? But is there an opportunity for us to diagnose what we're going using these set of assumptions to be able to create an opportunity to discuss something that would give us a crisis-ready plan to move forward? Now, I also added this opportunity for strategic vision because we cannot forget, we can't sort of mortgage the present to our future. Now, this is a difficult message to give, but I think it's an important one because I think, we are talking about people's lives, right? This isn't a day-to-day. This isn't something that we should be flippant about. This is something that's very serious, but potentially something that we learn today and capture in a strategic way may save lives in the future. We know some of, hindsight's 2020. We see some of the challenges that different countries and governments have taken, not being prepared or being prepared incorrectly. All of these things, what we're finding out is, the heroes of this particular situation, let's be honest, it's not going to be the government or the billionaires, right? It's going to be the people in the front line. It's going to be the doctors, the nurses, the paramedics, the police, the firemen. Those are the heroes of today, and we owe it to them and to them or the people that will be in the future to be able to prepare them in such a better way. And so the lessons that we learn from crisis readiness should move to more of a strategic vision. Like, what am I learning today that I should adopt as an opportunistic view to the strategies of the future. And so what I want to do right now is I want to pause in this case. I want you to take a look at some of that. Maybe you'll take a picture. You're listening to my voice right now, whether it be live or recorded, take a look at each one of these and ask yourself those assumptions. To say, do you know that to be a fact? Can those assumptions be validated? Do you know your constituents? Are all the processes are available to execute, right? This is all of the forward set of assumptions, that forward looking. Have you considered the social implications of our services? Have we considered technological and implications of our positions? Do I have an infrastructure? Going back to the ability to capture people's skills, and not only their past skills, current skills, but also the skills that they're learning today that I might lose in the future. Do I have those in place? Do we understand the constraints of our financial position? How much can we do? I have a good inventory of our assets. We now know, right? We now know that we have a shortage of ventilators. Could we have known? Do we have known? I don't know, but certainly it would have been nice to take a strategic vision and be able to put a crisis readiness map to say, if I needed to pull a trigger on this, what is it that I would have to do to make that happen? So I want you to start thinking about these things, asking those kinds of questions. And let me give you a situation, a sort of a business continuity view of it. I know that business continuity is a term that often is attributed, again, to private sector, but it's probably no more challenging and appropriate in today's situation. How, as a hospital, how, as an institution, how can I continue to conduct, and I use air quotes, business? How can I treat my patients? How can I get people feeling better as quickly as I possibly can? And so what we usually have is we have this idea of strategic planning, and that helps the business continuity. We have this operational management, right? Strategic planning usually feeds into operational management. But can we go back and understand the playbook around crisis readiness? Do we have something that we can draw upon that would say, this is what I need to do? Not only that, but while we're going through this, there's an opportunity to learn. And arguably, I probably should have used an arrow to go pointing right back to operational management. Maybe there are things that I'm going to learn to say, look, this is a best practice. What's interesting is you take a look at the numbers, but there's probably a bunch of other numbers that are actually good numbers that we're not looking at. For example, most infectious diseases that we usually go through are actually down because we're doing these other things, right? Because we are wearing masks. And so there's an opportunity here to say, well, I don't know, maybe there are times that I should wear a mask, especially those that, that are in that, that sensitive aspects. I mean, certainly the people in my family who are cancer survivors that have very little immune system, right? This is an opportunity to learn from that. Maybe hand sanitizers or the way I wash my hands is something that I should just continue doing, because not only would it help my current situation, but my future situation as well. And there's things that I can learn. So remember I told you about this idea of the fracture, the disruptors highlighting the crack in your foundation. That crack, again, could be my own. Say, man, guess what? I'm a really good hand washer now, and I use hand sanitizers, and I happen to live in Colorado, so I also use hand lotion too. These new practices, I don't see those going away from me, and I think that maybe I'll have a better quality of life with those simple changes. Maybe those things can also apply to you personally, but what also can apply to your department and to your organization as well? What are those opportunities that we have to say, something, this is a practice we should keep? So not only will it be a strategic aspect, but it'll also be an operation. This is how we're going to do things in the future. And so I like to go ahead and summarize exactly what we talked about, right? We talked about learning lessons, right, from industry that maybe will help us. And this pandemic can represent any other kind of disruptor that you might find now or in the future. We talked about how we can quickly create adjunct workforces. to be able to not only bring them up quickly, but also get them skilled up and go through, just in case, moving to a just-in-time learning paradigm. And then learning from operations that that we can not only go and look at crisis readiness and ask those assumptive questions, but also feed them our learning back to strategic vision. Be prepared, and all of these things should stitch up very, very nicely. Now, as I see here at the clock on the wall, we're getting towards the Q&A session, and I know that we're getting a lot of comments. I'm looking forward to hearing those. But we decided that we wanted to sort of give ourselves some breathing room. And in 2 weeks, on April 28th, we're going to have sort of a part two. We're going to kind of take up this mantle, this pandemic vibe that's teaching us so much, and how can we reimagine the patient engagement, right? How can we pay greater levels to margins? And I don't mean margins in the sense of money, but margins in the sense of our time, our skill, our collaboration, right? That discretionary time that usually falls into this altruistic view to greater innovation, creativity, employee engagement. If there was ever greater innovation time, it would be today. You've got a car manufacturer that's now making ventilators, right? Talk about innovation at its best. And so hopefully you found the last half hour, 35 minutes useful. I hope to see you next time, and I'd like to turn it over to Anuja to see what kind of comments are we getting or questions are we getting. I'm excited.
Thank you so much, Tom, for that fantastic presentation. We will now begin today's question and answer session. As a reminder, please submit any questions you have by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your dashboard. We will try to get through as many questions as we have time for. But before we jump into the questions, we are getting some really interesting comments from our attendees. So I would just like to run through a few of those comments. One commentator wrote, "Our hospital is training up staff, med-surg nurses to progressive care nurses, and progressive care nurses to ICU nurses." Another commentator. I'm sorry.
No, I want to jump in here real quick.
Sure.
So what's really great, I want to continue to do, because obviously we're going to capture these all electronically, and we're all learning this together. And so I'll do other webinars. I talk to a lot of different people. These are great because this will allow us to get more informed, get the information that's happening, on the ground, right? It's so much, it's so new. Yeah, usually I'm doing research on things that happen, and I feel real comfortable with this. And in some kind of odd way, I feel excited about learning these things. And so please, if anybody keep putting your comments, your questions, and this is exciting. I'm sorry for cutting you off, Anuja. I just wanted to say that this is very, very useful.
No, not at all. Absolutely. A couple more comments I'd love to run through before we jump into some questions. One is Andy wrote, "Multi-state nurse provider license compact and upskill training for clinical, non-clinical staff are strategies that we are applying." And then another interesting comment here, "Teach use of peritoneal dialysis and hemodialysis equipment is another area." So definitely some insightful comments there. I'd love to jump into some of the questions that we're getting in here as well, Tom. So our first question here is, as the lockdown restrictions get eased and businesses start to come back, how can hospitals augment or realign their workforce to do both critical care and elective surgeries?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and thank you for the opportunity to answer, because it extends my ability to address some of this. So what we were faced with before this was arguably kind of a blanket lack of all types of situations, right? Both critical care and elective surgery. We just didn't have enough to do. Now, because we're focused on this critical care, that doesn't necessarily mean that elective surgeries aren't out there. I happen to know a lot of people that are waiting. As a matter of fact, a peer of mine is waiting for an MCL, yeah, something that is knee, I think that's right, surgery that he has to postpone, and right now until August. He's still doing some physical therapy, and because he's allowed to do that, but he can't have that surgery, and the need is still there. So I think what's going to happen is I do think that we will get back to what I'll call the next normal. We'll have now an opportunity to create a broader view of how we're going to deal with both critical and elective surgeries. I do still think that we're going to be short on just people in general because the demand's certainly not going to go away. We still have the ongoing change, a generational change that's happening. So we have people. The good news is what I love about healthcare just in general is that there's an underlying what I call dial tone of altruism and wanting to help people. You've got people coming out of retirement. You got people that maybe were administrators are now jumping back in the fray and just helping. And that's just so wonderful to see. But eventually all of those people will go back, right? They'll go back to administration. They will go back to being retired, and we'll still be faced with that. So I think what I would continue to do is I think there's an aspect of trying to be nimble in how you deploy your resources. And the way you be nimble is by document and by managing the resources you have. I think sometimes there's a lot of skills out there that people picked up that happen. I'll give you a sort of a non-clinical classic example is myself. I happen to speak Spanish and Portuguese fluently. Listening to me, you probably wouldn't think that, but that's just one of those kinds of skills. And interestingly enough, we do business in South America. And if I don't tell people, if I don't document, if I don't put it in my profile, that's skill that's not going to be able to be used. So what's that skill? What is that's happening today, the new kinds of things? Special ventilator skills or the ability to do these new things that you're learning on the job. Where am I going to be able to find that thing to be able to point to it? So I do believe that we're going to go back and be able to align. The question is, I still think we're going to have a challenge in just pure quantity of people to provide. But I think the good news is we're going to be in a situation where we'll be more cross-trained.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your insights there. Our next question is, are you a proponent of expanding the use of telemedicine to maintain separation and enhance cost-effective care delivery?
I am. Not only, it's one of the things, not only do I believe in it, but I'm also a customer, right? It's one of those things. Because technology is continuing to grow, and what I mean by technology, not necessarily sort of the computer you're looking at, but also, the ingenuity that comes from medicine that is happening and moving and be able to diagnose. I actually did that with my pet 2 weeks ago. Did telemedicine with my pet, where the vet looked at it and we had the video and we were able to do sort of some of the more less complicated things. And I think that's important for a couple reasons. Number one, we're still going to be strapped with the total amount of people that are going to be able to service. But if we can find better ways to offload the more simpler generic challenges, common colds, maybe a common flu or something like that, that can be diagnosed pretty easily and be able to send by the way, all my medicine right now, because of this situation, I've changed them all to be shipped to me. So maybe you don't consider that telemedicine, but prescription drugs are now coming to my door. I'm going to keep that, right? So there's these new advances, not only in technology but in our use of technology, and I think it's going to change. And I think it's going to be needed. And here's the punchline: I think it's going to be needed because we need to alleviate our healthcare practitioners what I would consider sort of more serious thing. There's going to be sort of these non-elective things. I mean, for example, there's a bunch of people right now that probably just have the common cold, and they're just dealing with it. Maybe they can tell them, they're not putting a strain on it where maybe they would have, and they're able to take care of it, and they'll be fine. So, yes, I think that's one way. I think there's going to be a bunch of other ways that are going to come up through this. Necessity is the mother of invention, right? So we have a need. I think we're going to have really smart people figuring out how to do this.
Absolutely, all part of this new normal that we're entering into. So our next question here is, how can healthcare organizations use virtual learning as a way to retrain and update their healthcare providers?
Yeah. So I think what we have to do is we have to have a better understanding what virtual learning is, because I think up until now, because we did not have the pressures of getting information out quickly, we thought that if we used the content, for example, face-to-face or PowerPoint, that all I got to do is sort of put that on a website, maybe a PDF or something you can download it, maybe a voice over PowerPoint. Those techniques are all very good for what are considered hard skills. The problem is those are not good techniques for soft skills. And so we know that when we're trying to upskill the hard skill stuff, I think we got figured out pretty well. What we need to do is we need to move those hard skills, that content, to something that's a little more mobile and a little more just in time. What we do need to do is we need to rethink how we actually go about teaching soft skills in a virtual environment. I think that's the trend that I am seeing, because in the past you would say, well, we can teach people face to face, or maybe even through virtual conference, like maybe have our cameras on, or maybe have an instructor led. We can all get together, and the soft skills have never really been qualified as what I would call critical up until now. I think what we're seeing is a tremendous amount of need in soft skill training, because we're missing it, right? We can't do it like this. We're not set up to do it. For example, if you go back to the Cornerstone Cares website, we did our research to find out, well, what do people need like immediately? We found a bunch of people like stress management, right? How do I collaborate with workers and other people from home? Those are all soft skill kinds of things that people needed to find. And so what we're doing is we're working towards putting those things together where soft skills can be done effectively in a virtual environment. And so, yes, I see. Again, for summary, I think the hard skill stuff, I think we got that figured out. I think this virtual thing is fine. It's how do we get soft skills virtually done effectively and on time, right? In some level of immediacy or urgency. And I think we're at the threshold of that.
Thank you so much, Tom. We'll jump right into our next question here, as we're getting quite a few great questions. This question is about just-in-time learning. So getting staff through the just-in-time learning as an adjunct staff has been difficult. How can this be made simpler?
Well, there's this onboarding, right? This is exactly what Amazon and Hyatt are trying to mitigate, right? They're saying, look, I got to furlough these people because I just don't have business for them. And meanwhile, Amazon's like, look, I need people immediately, and here comes Hyatt's going to get 10,000 people. They're going to give it to Amazon. They already know their known quantity. They've done background checks. All of this other stuff has been done through Hyatt. There's a level of validity that comes with that interchange. And you're not just getting somebody that's got a piece of paper, a resume, or somebody that said work here. You're getting a company that's saying, look, this person is good for these kinds of things because this is a skill that they have. And then Amazon takes them and does all this. And eventually, it's going to flip-flop, right? We're not going to need all of those people in Amazon, and we're going to send them back. Here's the good news for Hyatt. I'm going to get the people back that I like. I don't have to re-interview them. I don't have to rehire them. I don't have to retrain them or onboard them. I can get them on Friday and drop them back in their job on Monday, and they're going to be incredibly productive. And I've lost little, if no money in the entire transaction. So we need something like that in the healthcare industry that allows me to reformulate staff and deploy them in critical areas so I can be expedient in my service delivery and reducing the downtime of onboarding. And we got to look at it as onboarding doesn't mean, or orientation, whatever term you want to use, doesn't mean I'm new to the company and therefore I need all this other stuff. The minute I'm new to the role, there should be some kind of onboarding that goes into it, even if I'm in the same institution, the same department, arguably maybe even the same job. I'm just moving maybe to a different floor. There's got to be something that's very expedient and quickly in doing that. And I think we've always, in the back of our minds, thought of onboarding in a very traditional sense, as if I only have to do it once for the company and then I'm kind of done. That's just not the case, and we see that. That's why I want to make sure, and I hopefully you can hear it in my voice, I want everybody to make sure that we have an opportunity here to really, really prepare ourselves for the future and taking some of these learnings. And so when I take a look at somebody like an adjunct workforce, somebody that maybe is a dermatology nurse, and I want to make them a critical nurse, it'd be really, really great if I knew exactly what this specific nurse knew and what specifically does he or she have to know to do the other job, and how quickly can I close that gap. And I would call that onboarding, just kind of as a catch-all. That's why you'll see from a technological perspective, I don't want to get into it, but if people are interested, blockchain is going to be something that's going to be very important because it validates that background. It makes it very easy and portable to take your skills and credentials and all of that to the next position. That's what that technology is trying to solve. But I think for now, I think we have to be significantly more specific in understanding people's background, regardless of where they may be, as well as how do I close that gap?
Right, absolutely. Some great insights there, Tom. Thank you. So we have time for one more question, and we'll go with this one. What new paradigms for learning do you see occurring in healthcare after this pandemic? Virtual reality, distance education, so on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I see a whole bunch of new paradigms across all sorts of industries because of this, and I think they're all good. I think this adjunct workforce is one that I've really been thinking a lot about, because if we could be nimble at any given time, I'll give you a classic example that just happened. For those that may be listening to me right now, or Nashville, my heart goes to you. Right, we had terrible tornadoes out there. That it's its own disruptor, its own emergency crisis in that location. It didn't get as much airtime as I think it should have in the media, and I don't know exactly if all of the resources were able to be deployed given this larger global pandemic. The people that live in Nashville obviously didn't think that was minimal. How can we quickly be nimble and flexible to answer the needs not only of the globe but to the local? Right, it's this idea of globalization, or think globally, act locally, whatever the slogan you want to use. And I think technology is going to help us do that. And I think this pandemic is going to show us areas that we can improve. I do believe virtual reality, specifically things like augmented reality, are going to be really good, because what virtual reality and augmented reality does, other than being cool technologies, it is a wonderful gateway into teaching people soft skills, which is the challenge that I currently see. I did a presentation about 2 or 3 weeks ago about this particular topic. It's like, why is it that soft skills continues to show up on the list? Matter of fact, I did a comparison between 2017 and 2005 of the skills needed in the healthcare industry. They were the exact same list. So in the 15 years, we still haven't figured out how those new things. Well, they're all soft skills. So I do think that it's not necessarily the use of technology that's so super cool. It's what that technology can do and to bring and surface that will help in things like virtual reality. So yes, I absolutely think that's this, and I just hope that we do. I hope that we learn. That is my hope. It's let's not lose this very challenging but yet opportunistic view of how we can redeploy our resources for the future.
Definitely, and that is a great note to close out our Q&A session on. Tom, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with our attendees?
I certainly hope that everybody really got a glimpse of what's going on today, what we can learn, what we can do today, but also don't forget that we have an opportunity to take a look not only as individuals, but as an organization, some of those faults, some of those cracks, myself included, and be able to patch those up for the future so we can be better than we are now. And I really sincerely hope everybody stay home, stay safe, just take care of your loved ones. We'll get through this. We're all in it together. Thank you for the opportunity.
Fantastic. Well, this is all the time that we have for today, and I want to thank Tom for his excellent presentation and Cornerstone On Demand for sponsoring today's webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.